Thanks so much, Walt. And thank you so much for having me today. Hello, everybody. I just want to confirm that you can see my screen okay? I think I can see it through the camera, so I think you guys can see it too.
Is she loud enough for everybody? Okay.
Am I?
Yeah.
Okay. I was going to say it might be the first time in history I wasn't loud enough for everybody, but all right, off we go. Again, thank you, Walt, for the introduction. Again, I am Sarah Sabaka, a senior threat researcher from Proofpoint's threat research team, here to bring you some insights from the threat landscape trenches. I've been with Proofpoint for just under 2 years. Prior to that, I had, for several years, I was leading a global cyber threat intelligence team for a very well-known financial organization. But perhaps more significant to this audience today is the fact that, unlike many of my industry peers who have chosen the lights of the big cities and the buzz of Silicon Valley, I reside in a very, very, very small town, the backbone of which are small and medium-sized businesses run by the neighbors who make up our small community and surrounding areas, just like yourselves, right? My husband and I also founded and run our own 501c3 nonprofit organization. It's an animal rescue and sanctuary. So you could say I'm in a rather unique position to understand the threat landscape from the perspective of small and medium businesses and nonprofit organizations, and of course, the large enterprises who may have representation in the audience today as well. But rest assured, there are a lot more folks like me over here on the Proofpoint threat research team, and we've all got your back, regardless of where we live. All right, so here are the items we'll be covering in the following slides. First up, it's only fair because I've been talking about the team that I provide a bit of introduction to what we do and how we do it, including our unofficial mission statement. Then we're going to dive right into the threat landscape. I won't lie, it's going to be a bit of a bumpy ride, but I promise to wrap up with some peace of mind and genuine messages of hope as we look ahead on the cyber horizon. Okay, so a quick intro first into the Proofpoint Threat Research Program. Our unofficial mission statement, I have to say unofficial because I made it up. I wanted a definition around us when I talked to folks like you. So this is it. The Proofpoint Threat Research Program endeavors to bring deeper context to threat data, to advance detections, and to support tactical, operational, and strategic intelligence objectives through our published research. To talk about our research, first, it's important to understand our data landscape. Where is our information coming from? How do we know the things that we know? Our trove is massive. Beyond email data, we also have telemetry for network and cloud-focused threats. So what that does is it allows us to pull in more information than what's in email to really bring a very holistic view of what's happening on the threat landscape. And just to pull one of the handful of stunning data volume numbers from this list, we see more than 300,000 unique malware samples per day. That's not per year, that's not per week, that's per day. We are neck deep in malware and threats every single day. And what do we do with all of that data and research? We produce threat intelligence in multiple forms. We have our Proofpoint paid threat intelligence platforms and services, of course, but we also offer a lot to the community for free, which may not be well known, but we do. What this does is this includes our threat insight blog, where we post in-depth research reports. With that research, we provide indicators of compromise and a lot of tactical intelligence to go with it when appropriate. That's for those of you who may have in-house or work with managed services for your security operations. All of this is open to the public too, just a reminder. We wouldn't be a true technology professional program if we didn't have our own podcast too. So there's that for those of you who are listeners. The podcast is really fun. We are very much genuine in them. We have a lot of fun, very informational and entertaining. We also use Twitter to publish immediate and time-sensitive intelligence research to our Threat Insight account feed. That's also open to the public. And finally, we also plug our intelligence into a small, lesser-known product called Emerging Threats that Proofpoint has. Again, there's an open source version for the community. What this does, this is for network detection appliances. And I'll touch more on this product later. But the point here is that Proofpoint Threat Research produces a variety of threat intelligence products for open public consumption, not just for customers. All right, so the threat landscape, let's dive in. First up, email is still a threat actor's #1 preferred attack vector. So what this means is that of all the ways a threat actor can take the first steps to compromising a user or a system, essentially to deliver a threat, email is still the method that is most preferred. It's the tried and true. It's historically been preferred. It is one of the reasons I came to Proofpoint, actually. I wanted to drown in data, in threat data, and I knew email was the tool that threat actors use the most and have for the longest. So here I am. Typically, I'd start by introducing you to the cast of bad actors first, but since we're speaking about a specific industry or industries in the room that are maybe not ones that a layperson would immediately guess is targeted by cyber threat actors, I thought it was important to understand the why. Let's understand the victims, the victim profile. So that as we proceed through this information and the rest of this deck, and we discuss more about the threat actors, their tactics, techniques, procedures, we'll be able to tie all of that future information back to what we've learned here. We can tie all the maliciousness back to what makes SMBs and NPOs good targets for threat actors. So here's some of the reasons. If you're providing services as a third party to another organization, then the answer to this first question, this first bullet here, is likely yes. Why do threat actors target SMBs and NPOs? To leverage positions in a supply chain, to supply chain attacks. It's a really hot topic right now. Moving on. Compromised infrastructure or accounts. Those are always valuable. They can always be used. Threat actors can either sell them or just continue to reuse them. They're always valuable. There also may be a higher likelihood of persistence for a threat actor hiding on an SMB or an NPO's network. This kind of ties into that fourth bullet, specifically where SMBs and NPOs may have fewer resources at their disposal, including resources that could detect and respond to a threat in your environment in a timely manner. Important to call that out. So being that you may be a small or medium business or a nonprofit organization, you may be dependent on a managed service provider or a third party to address threats in your environment. So that's kind of a restriction there. You have a little bit less control over seeing what's there and what you can do immediately. You're reliant on a third party. And so this allows opportunity for a threat actor to kind of hunker down and get comfortable in a compromised environment and maybe won't be detected for a little while. So SMBs and NPOs are considered soft targets to threat actors because of such resource constraints, right? Sad fact, but resource constraints affect a lot of organizations too, so don't feel alone. And of course, much like large organizations across all verticals, SMBs and NPOs operate on budgets, and therefore they deal with money. So if you have money or can get money through a bank or a loan or whatnot, threat actors will target you. It's an opportunity they look for. All right. If you haven't read this year's Verizon Data Breach Investigations Report, the DBIR, as we affectionately call it here, it's always a good one, highly informational, and a lot about SMBs specifically, small, medium businesses, which nonprofit organizations can also adopt. It's lengthy, but I wanted to specifically highlight some of the top details for small businesses called out in this report. Within top patterns, we see social engineering and web application attacks, which in other words, exploitations of vulnerabilities in web applications. Those patterns account for 92% of the reported breaches affecting small businesses in this report. Email threats begin with social engineering. So this is a really compelling data point here, right? Always begin with social engineering for email. We also observe attempts to exploit vulnerabilities from email threat campaigns too, but the message here is social engineering is a big problem. Then threat actor motives, financial at 98% and espionage at 1%. This tracks with what we see with email-based threats too. We just published a huge report covering multiple years of research into the crimeware threat landscape, which is fueled by financially motivated threat actors. This is the majority of threats we see in email data, whereas espionage is typically a marker of nation-state APT actor activity. We also track those groups too. Lastly, the top category for data compromised at SMBs per this report are credentials. Credential theft campaigns are consistently observed as one of the highest volume threats we see in our email data globally. So credentials will never not be valuable. It's definitely a takeaway today. So this DBIR report does not only apply to email. This Verizon report, this data is incredibly data rich report, and it's not only from email data. So this covers a wide variety of data points and regions and customers and verticals and everything. So for it to call out things that are also specific to our email threat data is really compelling, something to keep an eye on. Commit to memory. All right. Speaking more specifically about us as individual humans, will cyber criminals try to attack me? Yes. Sadly, that's the truth. Unless you don't use internet at all. In that case, show me how you do it. Just kidding. Cyber criminals see you as a gateway to a lucrative payoff, right? So at work, you can be very profitable as you are the key, or you can be the key to critical or sensitive data, such as intellectual property, customer lists, finances, etc., and so on. As an individual, you can also be very profitable. Attackers can monetize you by luring you into making fraudulent wire transfers, sharing credentials, sensitive info, lots of different things. It all begins with social engineering, though, don't forget. I realize this is a rather intense information to hear, but the takeaway is that we're all in this together. We're all targets facing the same threats. And so there's no shortage of opportunity to network and share ideas for building a better future, building a security community based on protecting each other from cyber threats. They are a problem we are all facing. Speaking of cyber threats, let's dive into them. At a very high level, these are the threats we cover and how the term threat actor comes together. First threat type is malware. This is malicious code that executes on a system. Ransomware is a term, probably people's ears started perking up, maybe a little anxiety in the room. That is a very popular type of malware. We hear a lot about it in mainstream news. Credential harvesting, also called credential theft, is when threat actors aim to steal your login information for online accounts. Think your banking login information. Years ago, banking Trojans were like the hot malware item. Nowadays, it's a little different, but credentials are still very, very, very lucrative for a threat actor. Think name, password. Also, we're now seeing tools that target MFA tokens that threat actors are using. Lastly, BEC, which stands for Business Email Compromise, is when an attacker targets a business to defraud that company. This type of threat is based purely on social engineering. So think written words and text, whereas malware and credential harvesting threats have historically been carried out or delivered most often through emails that have malicious URLs in the body or a malicious file attached to that email message. And more recently through telephone-oriented attack delivery. Whole nother topic for another day. The people behind these threat types can pretty much be categorized into three groups. These are under actor types here. The first being the most populous group, the financially motivated threat actors. Most threat actors exist because of money and their desire for more of it and greed, regardless of how it's obtained. The second are our advanced persistent threat actors. These are AKA APT actors. These groups, threat clusters, are operators whose objectives align directly with their attributed nation states. So some of the countries that have APT actors attributed to them that you may hear about in the news are countries like Russia or China, for example, or North Korea. But we track APTs in every region, multiple different countries. They're not only in what's talked about in the news. They're kind of everywhere, right? So they lost my place. There we go. Okay, lastly, hacktivism is one we began tracking last year when we started to see some unrest in the United States with regards to some political actions. Hacktivism is very, very rare in email. In fact, I don't think we've seen it up until last year, but it's cool that we're keeping track of it. So maybe if it becomes a more popular mode of communication, email for hacktivism, then we'll do a report on it. But until then, it's a little quiet. Not as interesting in that realm, but e-crime, APT, very, 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 very active threats. When you put the two together, you have threat actors. Threat types plus actor types, threat actors. So a couple examples of threat actors hitting both verticals globally, or hitting hitting SMBs and MPOs globally in our data. These are just a few examples of some that I talk about a lot that are also found in probably targeting MPOs or found targeting MPOs and SMBs. Sorry, I'm getting a little tongue-tied. This is where I get excited and I start talking about the people behind the threats. So might get a little fast. I'll pace myself. TA 4903. So these TA plus the number at the end, these are the names. This is how we name our threat actors. A lot of different technology companies and research programs have unique naming conventions for their threat clusters that they track. And the answer for that is simple. Because we're all looking at different data, nobody's data matches one-to-one. So we need to have unique proprietary attribution process and procedure matrix for those types of threat clusters. So it gets a lot to track, but it's good that we do it. It's very efficient that way and makes for higher integrity intelligence. So first up, TA 4903, we've talked a lot about financially motivated threat actors. This is one that we've assessed with moderately high confidence that is a BEC actor. So this actor, their objective is to commit fraud against a business. This group is notable for spoofing various US government entities in the pursuit of corporate credentials. This group really kind of cool because they had their email lures and their templates were really, really, really well crafted and very convincing. TA5, we're going to go clockwise here. TA 569 is a very pesky threat actor. Their MO is to inject malicious code into legitimate and high traffic websites. So these are websites that you and I might visit every single day, read the news, check recipes, things like that. So this is what makes this threat very painful. Though they're not super targeted like an APT actor is, they're very opportunistic. What this malicious code does is it profiles users on these websites to identify high value targets. So here's your peace of mind. Just because you visit a website that may have malicious code in it doesn't necessarily 100% guarantee that you're going to be infected every single time. This threat group is very, very complex. They are looking for specific targets. What this threat actor does is if they decide on a target, a victim is desirable for them, then they let them go down the infection chain, let the victim go down the infection chain. And at the end, they either are infected with some type of backdoor malware, which allows backdoor secret access by the threat actor into your computer, or a ransomware incident could happen. Very, very tricky. TA 2536 has been around for a long, long, long time. They use a lot of commodity malware. So what that means is malware you can either buy or download for or subscribe to as a service to try to steal user credentials in credential harvesting campaigns. So that's really interesting. They use key locking malware specifically to steal credentials versus trying to trick a user to go to a website and plug in their credentials that way. TA 570. All right. Lastly, we attribute TA 570 as an initial access broker or an IAB. The objectives of an IAB, these threat actors are really, really interesting. The objectives of such an actor are to deliver and install malware on a system to attain access, compromising the system, and then they turn around and sell that access to other threat groups, namely ransomware operators. Cybercrime is a business and threat actors work together. We're not going to dive into this slide as deep. I don't want to run out of time, but these are some threat actors for APT and state-aligned groups that target SMBs pretty heavily. So, but just keep in mind, APT campaigns are not broad. They're not broad and sweeping. They're not high volume like crimeware campaigns, like the threat actors on the last slide. The APT actors are highly sophisticated, they're deliberate, and they're very careful. They target a very, very small set of victims, several in government and higher education verticals, for example. So just because I'm showing you APTs do target SMBs, do not feel like they are targeting every SMB. But if you want to know more information, in-depth research that we did into how APT nation state aligned threat actors are targeting small and medium businesses, we published a whole report on it just a few weeks ago. So this study looked at data from over 200,000 small and medium business organizations over the course of 1 year, pulled it all together. Some of the high-level key observations that we found are that APT actors will use compromised infrastructure in phishing campaigns. So that tracks with why SMBs and MPOs actually are really good targets for threat actors. They can use your infrastructure. APT will engage in targeted, state-aligned, and this is weird, right? Financially motivated attacks against SMB financial services. So Really, this is a North Korea threat actor that did this, and I fully encourage you to read the report because it is really interesting. We typically don't see APT actors who are financially motivated on behalf of a nation state, but this one is. So very, very interesting. And what they were doing was targeting small and medium business financial services to steal money. This is also, I believe, a cryptocurrency actor. They favor cryptocurrency theft of. And then lastly, APT actors targeted SMBs to initiate supply chain attacks. So that's another big one. Really good report to read. Okay, so we've covered your victim profile and we've discussed why threat actors would target SMBs and MPOs, then discussed the threat actors who are actively targeting orgs like yours, organizations like yours on the threat landscape. Now we're going to dive into how they do it. What are their tools? A common acronym in this industry when we start talking about tools is TTP, right? What's their TTP? Essentially what that means is what's their tool. And that's TTP stands for tactics, techniques, and procedures. Hint, for email threats, again, everything starts with social engineering. So that is a major tool, a major TTP that we see in email. Everything starts with it. So what is it? What is social engineering? It's a tool, a set of tactics that relies on human interaction using manipulation, persuasion, and exploitation to deceive users into taking an action that could lead to compromise of information and/or systems. Sounds pretty intense, right? I'll show you some examples of social engineering. But essentially, this is a human-to-human interaction. This relies on human interaction. So it's not technology-based. Interesting, right? Biggest threat that we see, biggest technique that we see in email data is social engineering. It's endlessly scalable, limited only by an attacker's ingenuity, and even without the use of malware or technical exploits, the aftermath of a successful social engineering attack can be devastating. To this day, it remains the most common technique encountered by our researchers. Among the many threats we observe, the majority rely on some element of psychological manipulation. That's kind of a good thing, and I'll get to it, the reason why at the end, I promise. So, social engineering. How do threat actors exploit victims? Exploitative emails try to compel you to take an action based on your emotion. The email elicits an emotional response, whether it's anxiety or sadness or, urgency. Remember, keep in mind, your emotional mind takes over when your logical mind is tired or distracted. So stay on your toes. And in this slide, specifically trust, I find to be a big one, especially when you're a small business or a nonprofit organization specifically. In my experience, when I was getting this NPO off the ground, just looking for free or low cost software to use. I had signed up for a few things to get some, quotes or just learn more about different solutions. This also applies to small business too, right? When you're getting something up off the ground, you want to be as efficient and frugal as possible. And with that, you may end up trusting certain websites or people that may not have true intent, pure intent. You get sales leads for platforms and applications. It's overwhelming and gets a little confusing, right? So you have to be very careful when you're looking for free software or low-cost software or things for sales. What are you clicking on? Who are you talking to? What information are they asking for, and who are you providing it? I recently started to receive phishing emails to my nonprofit's email account that uses very recognizable animal-related brands and names that I've grown to trust. The message lure stated that my profile for the website I use to list our dogs for adoption that we have in our rescue, that account is going to be deactivated. Now, would you expect that message to elicit an emotional response from me? That the website that I use to list dogs that need homes is going to be deactivated and no longer exist? Of course, I'm going to panic and think, oh my gosh, no, that can't happen. What do I need to do to make sure it doesn't? And that email had a couple links in it. Thankfully, I am who I am and I knew what to look for. But I also believe that my mom, could know what to look for. User education has gotten so much better. And folks like you and I, we're all, very aware of threat actors. So I think, while this was a well-crafted email with a very recognizable brand, we would have been able to identify it for sure. But either way, the point is that threat actors know what they're doing. They know who they're targeting. They know that they do a little bit of OSINT and can tell, what's interesting, what are the big name brands, what's recognizable, things like that. So depending on your business or your organization, emotions do come into play, as well. Let's face it. Those of us who are in nonprofit work, we didn't start there to be millionaires. It's typically driven by a feeling of altruism, benevolence, or emotional attachment to a cause. So this makes us a little bit more of a vulnerability, right? A little bit more vulnerable because there's some type of an emotional or benevolent attachment to our mission, that nonprofit mission, that small, medium business mission. But don't worry. With that being said, being that it's all human based, this gives us more power and control to fight the threats too. So everything that's based on human interaction and human outcome and action that's taken by a human, we have the power to control and stop it right then and there. So that's a really great, empowering feeling to take away today. All right, we'll talk more about tips in the end. I'm getting a little ahead of myself. I'm trying to give tips before we get there. We love to talk about phishing, so it's important to define it just very quickly. Phishing is when attackers send a fraudulent email that's designed to trick people into doing something. It's very much like actual literal fishing in a lake or an ocean or wherever if you're a fisherman, you prefer to fish. The term phishing actually came about in the mid-1990s when cyber criminals began using emails to fish for, and I use air quotes, information from unsuspecting users. So since these early cyber criminals were often referred to as freaks with a PH, that term became known as phishing. So the FISHING got switched to PHISHING. So really kind of cool, right? So it is truly based on the definition of fishing, like seafood fishing. More tools at the disposal of threat actors. If someone were to ask you how threat actors gather all of this stuff they need to launch an attack campaign, like malware, compromised infrastructure, servers, email accounts, etc., what would be your guess? Would you guess that there's a whole cyber criminal ecosystem with services operating on formal business models, for example, like this? These are screenshots from something called Bulletproof Link, which is a subscription service, phishing as a service type business. What this type of service does is it allows a person to pursue their goals of being a threat actor or, carry out threat actor activity through the ability to rent or subscribe to such a service where they can select, features a la carte. They can, set up their infrastructure all within this portal. They can choose templates. You can see in the top right-hand corner, $100 for an Office 365 phishing page template that looks pretty realistic. So this is the cost of what it means to be a threat actor on the threat landscape these days. These are the types of tools that they're using, and they're scalable, right? So with very, very little overhead. Cannot have phishing as a service without malware as a service. Same idea. People can rent malware infrastructure, subscribe to it. They can do templates for malware specifically. And these are all, $37.95 for 1 month to use a remote access Trojan. This is Warzone, also known as Ave Maria Rat. That's pretty low overhead for the potential of a threat actor to successfully compromise a high value target or a small medium business, which they can then turn around and look for that small medium business. Does that business have any big customers that they can then hijack an email thread and carry out further attacks down the line in a supply chain type of scenario? This is what we're dealing with here on the threat landscape. So just another example, malware as a service. So all pretty affordable, right? The best part is that some of these services are operating just out in the open. And by best, I mean the worst part. You don't necessarily need to know a secret handshake or some type of code for these underground dark web marketplaces anymore. Some of these sites are just even cached and showed up during simple Google searches. So they're really accessible, but that also makes being a researcher and the person on the defense, right? The good folks, the good actors, the threat researchers and programs like us and all the other threat research programs out there. That's what makes our jobs easier, because just like the threat actors are able to access this stuff, we're able to pull it down for research as well. And we're not doing anything bad because it's all for research in the name of good. All right. So what does all of that look like as an email end user? So you have all of these tools, this malware, these weird, templates for these phishing pages. What does it look like? It's got to look good, right? That's it. Just looks like an email, right? A pretty convincing email. So this one, actually, what we were able to determine that this was a phishing kit. This came from a phishing as a service affiliate service. There's too many opportunities to say the word service when you talk about fast, but this was a pretty good one, right? So this is one of their templates. These are some of the when we talk about landing pages, these are the pages where a user would put in their credentials. So these are the landing page templates. Some are better than others. Looking at you down bottom right hand corner, that invoice login page, that's also an Excel web spreadsheet looking like. So that's weird. Some are better than others. That's the point here. Here's another one. This looks at Microsoft Teams. This is a very convincing template, phishing template. All of these are real world phishing, malicious phishing email messages examples. Here's another credential receiver page. Here is, this was not, from what I understand, not leveraging a FAS or a MAS model, but this is another example of a template, a phishing template. This is actually attributed to an APT actor. So it doesn't have to be super fancy to be convincing. It just has to look kind of plain and good, right? Doesn't look terrible. Here's another fun one. This is a good example. We'll end on this section, this doom and gloom section on this note, and we'll get into some hope, an area of hope in the next section. But this is one of the templates that we saw. This is a little dated, but still a really good example of how threat actors do know what's timely and topical, and they build their lures. They put effort into social engineering because there's phishing as a service and malware as a service and evil proxy and all these other things, these other tools that a threat actor can pay to use. They don't have to be super technically savvy or even really that good at hacking or whatever they want to say that they're doing. They just have to have a few bucks and some patience, and they can do that. So where their effort goes is creating these beautiful lures that are incredibly convincing, designing new techniques to get past security controls, and really putting an effort into curating relationships with their victims via email in correspondence. So good example of Justin Bieber. And this is actually one of our telephone-oriented attack delivery threat. I'll share a blog. I did not enough time to talk about toads, but this is a good example of that technique. It's when threat actor sends an email to try to get the victim to pick up the phone and call a phone number. And what they're doing is essentially calling a threat actor without realizing it. The threat actor then directs the user on the phone to either download software or input their credentials. So it either is credential harvesting or malware, but the user doesn't know the whole time. So that takes the threat out of the email pipeline. So fun techniques threat actors are identifying and using. So looking ahead, all right, so here we're going to go into the horizon, into the sunshine and the rainbows, and we're going to know that we have the power. The power is in our hands to fight these threat actors. They have all these tools and they use all this stuff, but really what it boils down to is everything begins with social engineering, which is a human-to-human technique. All right. Despite the availability of malware as a service and phishing as a service and other tools, threat actors are still needing to be creative with social engineering and continuously evolve their techniques and tools. Why? Because user education. We are watching them and staying ahead. 5 years ago, my mom would not be able to define a phishing message, and that's fine. I wouldn't have expected her to 5 years ago. She doesn't work in this industry, but now she could easily. And I have full faith that any stranger on the street would be able to tell me what a phishing email was in one way or another. So we are getting smarter. Users are getting smarter. We're watching cybersecurity and information security and cyber threats have become a kitchen table topic. They're reported in mainstream media. So the awareness is growing. And so that's why, the threat actors are having to be creative. Their targets are getting smarter. Just some common social engineering tactics. We talked a little bit about it in previous sections, but really high level, masquerading as someone you know or trust. This is a common one in BEC. BEC actors will spoof the sender email address to look like it's a vice president or an executive from the targeted organization. This is to compel the victim to have a little bit more urgency to act on the request, make them nervous that the CEO was contacting them, and so on. Your emotions are heightened. This is a huge one. Did you get a message that's making you anxious or nervous? That's a really, really big, popular, well-known social engineering tactic. The request is urgent. Again, eliciting an emotional response, a sense of urgency, like I got to do this now. The offer feels too good to be true. We know nothing good comes free these days. So that's a pretty simple one. Are you receiving help you didn't ask for? Again, the world is everyone's busy these days. So are you receiving help from a stranger that you're not super familiar with that you didn't ask for? Is it too good to be true? It's probably social engineering, or this this gives space for you to ask more questions and try to make the decision, right? Sender can't prove their identity. Last but not least, so in years past, we have tried to encourage, or we have encouraged folks to identify a sender by picking up a phone or calling them and calling the number you have on file for them to confirm that they sent an email and so on. But that's a good technique. But nowadays, things are getting a little bit more tricky. So you really have to push hard to get a suspicious sender to prove their identity. And if they can't, then just delete the email and walk away. With spoofing and I'm not even going to say we don't see deepfake technology being used by financially motivated criminals at this stage in the game, but there's a lot out there that's getting a little bit scary. And with we get a lot of questions about ChatGPT and things like that. So these are all things to take into account and be aware of, but it all really boils down to tools that can be used for social engineering. So if you know these things and you keep these in mind and you kind of go through this checklist when you're reading an email that's making the hair on the back of your neck curl, not raise, but curl a little bit, like, this is suspicious, go through this checklist. And if you have any weird feelings or can't answer any one of these, then it's probably a fish. Some common misconceptions clarified about threat actors. They will take the time to build trust by engaging in extended conversations with victims. These are all things that we at the threat research program have witnessed, observed consistently. Threat actors will abuse trusted company services, recognizable brands, just like in my example of the animal-related well-known brand used in a lure email against me. Threat actors love to take that stuff and really, really, really manipulate us in our trust in trusted services like Google and Microsoft, the stuff that we see and use every single day. Threat actors will leverage orthogonal tech in their attack chain to adopt new techniques as security controls evolve and are more effective. This includes Toad. Threat actors are aware of and will use email conversations. That's threat hijacking, really, really scary too. Really, really important technique to be aware of. And then, like we saw with the Justin Bieber lure, threat actors will leverage topical, timely, and socially relevant themes. So they are smart. They have time. Now that there's tools available to them, they have time to socially engineer you. Another good news, bright spot. Infection chains, like malware, are getting longer and more complex because advancing security controls and solutions are crushing threat actor efforts. Yay! That's good news. And I'd like to introduce you to Emerging Threats Open. This is a community resource just for you. It's free. It's provided by Proofpoint. These are the network signatures that we write. They're either, in Snort, Suricata rule sets that you can feed right into your IDS, IPS. These rules are platform agnostic. We also take rules from the community and publish them as well. Very much a wonderful community resource for you. Again, this one's free. We publish about 5 rules a day in the free version. There's also a paid version, which, even though it's paid, it's very, 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 very low cost. This is about 50 rules published a day. And then with that, you can do emerging threats intelligence if you want more context. But really the point here, the takeaway is this community resource for you, small, medium business, nonprofit organizations. You may not have a ton of budget for network detection. So this is a really valuable resource. Emerging Threats is awesome. And I'll send this entire deck. You'll get all of the resources, links to everything, so you can check it out. Thoughts on community resources. Even though, when we think security, we may immediately associate it to technology, but really security is very much people-centric, especially information security. We're all truly in this together. We're facing common threats across the board. As a cyber threat intelligence practitioner, I will say that nothing was more valuable to me when it comes to having advanced knowledge and understanding of threats on the horizon than those personal trusted networks and relationships that I've built throughout my career within this community. So you could all start a community network here today. You could start a meetup group. The meetup app is a really good tool to use. I think it's free actually, to put together these, information security networking meetups. Meetups and groups are popping up all over the world, and they are necessary. I love this quote by Tara Wheeler. If you don't know her, she's like all over the place. She writes for the Council on Foreign Relations. She's a social scientist. She's an InfoSec executive, an author, and a poker player. But she said, security is a public good. You don't get as much of it if you try to only protect yourself as you do if you work to protect the whole community, and others do the same. If we're protecting only ourselves, that's just ourselves. We're still tied into technology from all other, regions of the world and vendors and organizations. So when you're protecting your community, you're also protecting yourself. So it's very much a community, people-centric thing. Really, to drive home that fact, information security is a never-ending chess match between the threat actors, so the people behind the threats, and network defenders. And you and I, everybody's a network defender at this point because we're all on a network, right? So we're all network defenders. I was not going to use the famously overused yet very relevant quote in this industry by Sun Tzu, but essentially, if you can anticipate your enemy's move, then you're already ahead of them. This cyber information security in general in cyberspace is definitely a strategy game. All right, 2 more slides to go. User education and awareness is an incredibly powerful tool in a security stack. As we've learned today, social engineering is the basis for all, email threats, and that's a human to human threat. So if you know what your enemy is doing when social engineering, then you know what to look for and you know what to avoid. Don't click. Protect yourself. Again, be careful what you click. Remember that you, your computer, your data, your services, all valuable to attackers. This is a huge one. Do not be shy to report your suspicions to the help desk. And when in doubt, ask the security team. We are your friends. The security team are your friends. The IT help desk, they're your friends. It would be better for you to report something that turns out to be a false positive than not report something that's a true positive that's not detected, right? So definitely get to know your security team and your help desk. It's again, community issue. Work together internally, and you'll be in good shape. So that's my spiel today. This is the Threat Insight blog and the podcast that I talked about quite a bit that we run over here at Proofpoint Threat Research. Free. There's no cost to use our blog or read our blog or download our reports or anything. And of course, the podcast is free as well. And I think, do we have time for questions?
We got a few. Thank you so much, Sarah.
Yeah.
If anybody has questions for Sarah, hit the button on your table and she will be able to hear you and you guys can Q&A. Anybody right away? If not, I'll seed a question. So anecdotally, it's mostly SMB space here. And anecdotally, I found with my SMB clients that we're seeing a ton of like business email compromise where it's like invoice fraud and stuff like that. And especially like nested where like this organization got compromised and they used their legitimate email to send emails to a partner organization.
Yep.
Are you seeing a ton of that? And like, what's the ratio of that to like the phishing, credential harvesting kind of stuff? What is that? What are you seeing around that?
Wow, great question. So we're the exact numbers I do not have on hand, but we see way more credential harvesting and BEC than we do malware. Threat actors, the BEC stuff is really easy for threat actors to do because they don't have to use malware, they don't have to use credential harvesting, they don't have to do any of these these affiliate models, they don't have to pay for anything. It's just all social engineering. So, and it can be scripted, and there's email distribution lists floating all around there that can be used for BEC as well. So BEC and credential harvesting, I would say, are the 2 highest volume threats that we see out of the 3 with malware, including malware. And then thinking about it from a financial loss perspective with the BEC stuff, it is a bigger threat financially to organizations, as we saw in the FBI IC3 report this year. It's like a $2.3 billion loss versus ransomware, which emanates from malware, which is only about a $34 million loss compared to BEC. It's pretty low. But yes, BEC, credential harvesting, highest volume, lots of it. In the, I don't know, I don't want to say numbers, but a lot of it, a lot more than malware.
Because it's a affiliate market, is it still mostly single threaded where it's one thing or the other thing? Or are they starting to like do multi-threaded where like we'll try and drop some malware and do a BEC and do some credential harvesting? Or are they still mostly just doing one thing per email campaign?
So we mostly see one thing, but we have seen threat actors get a little crazy and try to do a little bit of everything and see what they come back with. A lot of campaigns right now, we see like there's a malware element to it, but it's aimed at credential, like they want to steal credentials, and then there's attachments, but it's a credential. It's really interesting, the techniques and tactics that they're mixing up to get to reach the objectives that they have. But as far as like a message that's BEC, also with malware, also with credential harvesting, we have seen it, but it's very rare and it's like not super interesting. It's like a threat actor's first day on the job. Let's see what I can do.
I don't think anybody else has any questions, so we'll put you on hold because I think we're gonna have the panel, and I think we're gonna take a little break in between.
Okay. Cool. All right, I'm gonna go on mute.
Did you hear that?